On today's episode of May the Record Reflect.
The repeat reverse. So if you repeat your question and you still don't get the yes or no, you can reverse it. The light at the intersection was green. Long, rambling answer. The light at the intersection was green. Correct? Still a long narrative answer. So you're saying the light was red? Well, no, the light was green. Works every time. Okay. Probably better if you have a short enough cross-examination question, but you can just flip it and then get what you need from the witness.
My sort of rule is to be one level kinder than the witness is being to me, right? Because the jury has to like me more.
That was Judge Amy Hanley and Adrienne Johnson, and this is May the Record Reflect. Hello, and welcome to the monthly podcast of the National Institute for Trial Advocacy. I'm your host, Marcy Mangan, and I'm so glad you're here for today's episode. Judge Amy Hanley is back, along with a new guest, NITA faculty member Adrienne Johnson. Judge Hanley began her career as a first assistant county attorney and assistant attorney general in Kansas, leading high-level crime prosecutions, including a death penalty case that eventually came before the United States Supreme Court. Since 2016, she has served as a district court judge in Lawrence, Kansas, and since 2021 has directed the NITA Women in Trial program, which is coming to Chicago in September. Judge Hanley is joined by one of her Women in Trial faculty members, Adrienne Johnson. Adrienne is a trial attorney with the Wren Collective, a client-centered firm focused on creating significant change in the criminal justice system through communication, policy, legislative, and campaign support to the firm's clients. Adrienne previously served as a regional director at the Bail Project and also as the deputy supervising attorney at the Law Office of the Public Defender in DeKalb County, Georgia. While at the Public Defender's Office, she defended clients in criminal proceedings and trained first-year public defenders. And now she's training for NITA. And with that said, here's our interview. Judge Amy Hanley, welcome back. I think this is your fourth time on the podcast.
Yes, it is. I love being on the podcast, and I'm very excited to be here with both you and Adrienne today. Thank you.
Well, that's wonderful because I love having you here too. And as you mentioned, you've got someone with you, and that is Adrienne Johnson. And I want to welcome you, Adrienne.
It's good to be here. Good to be with such superstars.
So, Judge Hanley, you told me that when you and Adrienne were conversing about the ideas for this podcast, you had both observed that there are certain tasks that lawyers simply forget to do when they're preparing a witness. Is this a good time for you to reveal what those are?
I would love to reveal those because controlling witnesses and prepping witnesses, which is part of witness control, is the hardest thing about trial. So today we're going to give you specific fixes for that. When you're prepping a witness, many of us forget to give that witness time to ventilate. That's the word that I choose because when the witness comes in to meet with you, they're nervous, they're anxious, and most of them are dreading it. They need a few minutes to get things off their chest. That's what I mean by ventilate. Let them talk about what's on their mind. And that might be as easy as asking them, what are you most worried about? What questions do you have for me? So they can get that off their chest right away. It might also be something as simple as, did you find a place to park? I had another program director tell me that in Chicago, if anybody comes to meet you downtown, you need to let them talk to you about how awful the parking situation was and get that off their chest about all the stress that they had in simply finding a place to park before you start getting into the meat of witness prep. We're so amped up to prep the witness and talk about substance that we often forget that human element of decompression right at the beginning, ventilation for the witness. So let that happen before you get into the substance.
I think one thing I would add is we are used to being in court. We are used to talking to lawyers. We are used to talking to judges. And that's just not the case for most witnesses that we are going to interact with. And so I think really just giving them the space, even talking to you and talking to other lawyers, gives them the opportunity for them to feel more comfortable, for it to feel more natural. And I think we often take for granted that this is something we do every day, but is really sort of a blue moon opportunity for witnesses.
That's so true because our anxiety levels are different than theirs due to our comfort level. And what we want to do is to give those anxiety levels of the witness time to normalize, to just come back to normal. Oh, okay, I'm meeting with a lawyer. I was really worried about this. Now I feel better. This lawyer's talking to me like a person. I feel better now. I can actually hear what they're telling me is important. So if you don't have that time at the beginning for them to ventilate and let the anxiety levels come down, they might be listening. They're not going to hear and remember what you're telling them.
So that sounds like once you've taken that ventilation off the table, that anxiety off the table, it gives you a little bit of control
Absolutely.
over the witness. Okay. So when we think of witness prep, of course we think, witness. We think it's all about the witness, but it's not just about the witness, is it?
It isn't. The most important thing that you're doing, at least at the very beginning of witness prep, is actually like an audition. You are watching the witness to see what they are doing visually as much as you are listening to what they have to say. It's an audition, it's practice, it's rehearsal for what's going to happen at trial. That's when you're going to notice those verbal tics that you might notice that I use while I'm talking with Marcy and Adrienne here today. You'll notice if there are any physical movements, things that are distracting, gestures, things that you may want the witness to try to correct depending on how they come off to the observer at trial. Witness prep is going to be your chance to observe and hear things that are contrary to what you want the jury or the trier of fact to have at that trial.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity too for you to get to know the witness, not just through your interviews with them or depositions, but really how they're going to perform. So things like certain turns of phrase or words that they use commonly that you may not understand, or words that you use commonly they don't understand. It's really a good place for you to get that all out of the way and prepare yourself to ask great questions in a way that you know that your witness is going to be responsive to and will answer well.
I've had cases where I've had very young witnesses, children, and they certainly are anxious dealing with a lawyer, and they need some time to understand what my role is and a little bit of time to build rapport. But it's not just the young witnesses who need that. All witnesses need that. If you're an attorney and you've ever been a witness and you've been on the stand, you know how hard it is to be the witness. So today we're talking about how hard it is to control the witness's lawyers, but think what the witness is going through. So the rapport building element of that witness prep time is really important too.
So practice questions, of course, help your witness practice answers. And that's kind of a no-brainer, I realize. But there certainly are things that you need to know about crafting your practice questions. Adrienne, could you talk to us a little bit about what those are?
Yeah, when I think about practice questions, I think about really sort of crafting them in such a way, crafting my questions in a way that has plain, simple language, um, language that everyone, the witness, the fact finder can understand, making sure that they are short enough that the witness can give you the answer that they're looking for, really focusing on introducing one new fact at a time. And so when I think about practice questions, I really am thinking about making those questions um, really tight and succinct so that I am getting the answer that I want from the witness and the witness is able to understand what I'm asking.
So, not necessarily open to too much interpretation.
Right.
I think the most important thing to keep in mind when you draft those practice questions is knowing your whole case. We tend to prepare for certain parts of the trial in a vacuum instead of looking at the whole case. Maybe due to time constraints, maybe due to the fact that I'm going to prep this witness and it's still 2 weeks out from trial and I haven't even planned my opening yet. And I certainly haven't drafted my closing. But if you don't know your whole case, you're going to be forgetting important elements and important questions that you want to prepare this witness for. So, what that means is you've got to start thinking about your entire case and certain parts of the trial earlier than you might think about them because witness prep is going to occur earlier, at least a couple of days out from trial, maybe a week out from trial. So know your whole case, then work on those practice questions, and that will help you do what Adrienne's suggesting as far as keeping those tightly focused. The other thing that I think we sometimes forget is the witness is going to be there not just through your direct examination, but also for cross-examination from the other side. Practice questions should go both ways. This is a really great opportunity to bring someone else in the room from your firm or your office to do the cross-examination and have a little bit of role play back and forth for that practice. But that's part of it too. In fact, that's going to be the much more difficult part, usually, the cross-examination from the other side. So have a few questions ready for both direct and for cross.
As I was preparing for this interview today, I was thinking about how preparing somebody for testimony, it's both kind of theoretical and practical, because on the theoretical side, you practice and you practice and you practice with your witness, and how they perform in the practice session might lead you to believe, they're going to have this certain type of similar experience when they're giving their actual testimony as a result. But then as a practical matter, there's the reality of it. And sometimes people do great in the practice session and then they just crumble on the stand. So when it's the real deal, I would like to hear about those kinds of situations that maybe you've dealt with where you've lost control of the witness or the witness has lost control of themselves and they were great in practice and then they just crumble. How do you deal with that in the moment?
Do you see us both smiling? We're smiling because this happens more often than not. You have a great witness prep session, and due to nerves, due to length of time between the prep session and the trial, for whatever reason, the witness does not do what you expect them to do on the witness stand. It happens. It happens a lot. So there are specific remedies, and the biggest one is don't lose your cool. Don't abandon the witness, so to speak. No more questions, Your Honor, and sit down. You do have to deal with it, and you should expect it. And I'll take direct examination to give you a specific example as to how to remedy that, because that's what we want to do today. We want to try to be real about how often this happens and give you actual fixes for handling it when it happens in the courtroom. On direct examination, if the witness is, let's say, giving you a lot more information than they did in witness prep and a lot more than you want the jury to hear in this case, because they're nervous. We talk a lot when we're nervous. I talk a lot when I'm nervous. I talk more. One of the remedies I would give you is the combination of a head note and open-ended but precise questions. So here's what that looks like. If you are asking a police officer what happened next, you're going to get a long narrative answer. In order to focus that answer to the part of the crime scene, let's say, that you want them to talk about, your head note would be, Officer, right now I want you to focus on the items that you collected after you spoke to the eyewitness. What was the very first thing that you collected after that interview? When you collected that item, what did it lead you to? What else in the living room did you notice when you collected the computer cord? So my questions are still open-ended, which we want you to do on direct, to have the witness provide the information, but they're focused, they're precise, they're taking the witness right to where I want them to go. But I started with a head note. Now, an officer might not be the most common example of this. It's probably going to be a citizen witness, but every witness needs refocused once in a while. So when they don't do what you expect them to do on the stand, or they even just go down a path you didn't expect, you can redirect them with a combination of the head note and precise questions.
I think Judge Hanley is absolutely right. There's nothing I've found that's more effective than a head note to just let your witness, remind your witness of where you're trying to go. I also try to, when I'm doing witness prep, try to build in some what I consider safe questions, things that I know my witness is comfortable with, will sort of immediately know the answer to. And I will use those safe questions in my examination to sort of get them back on track, back comfortable and in the pace of testifying again. So I try to make sure that I'm thinking about things that will get them grounded again before we start moving and anxiety takes over.
That is such an excellent pointer. The comfort questions, things that will put the witness at ease. And I can think of a specific example with a child witness who unfortunately was a witness to a homicide, and part of it involves something with his coin collection. So I remember talking about coin collections in witness prep, and during trial, when he started to fade on me, we brought that up. And the thing about those questions is the other side's not going to object, right? They understand what you're doing. They would probably look pretty bad to the jury if they objected at those moments. So bringing them back with those comfort questions, I love that pointer. That's a really good one.
Yeah. And that's why rapport building is such a big part of prep, because you can't ask the question about coin collections if you haven't talked to your witness ahead of time and really gotten to know them. So, prep and rapport building goes so far for so many reasons.
Those are great tips. And I love the idea of being so compassionate and listening and being empathetic. So we've talked about direct. Now I'd like to talk about control in cross-examination. I know that you ask open-ended questions during direct to get your witness to talk, but heard again and again, NEDA faculty drive home the importance of asking leading questions on cross-examination. Why do we do it that way?
We want our narrative to be the controlling narrative that the jurors or the trier of fact is hearing. When we're asking leading questions, which are basically statements telling the witness what we want them to say yes or no to, that's putting our narrative first. And the other thing about that is we are training them that yes or no are the options here. They're the only options right now. Witness, I'm training you that I'm putting all the words out there and you're answering yes or no, which is completely the opposite, or at least it should be, of what was happening on direct. So you've got to have the witness sense that shift, and you need to have the jury sense that shift, because the attorney is now the star. The attorney's words matter. So we want to lead for that reason.
I always say that your superpower on cross-examination is the ability to lead and the ability to tell the story. And so I focus so much on leading on cross because I never want to give my superpower up. There are not many chances where lawyers get to be the ones telling the story. And I certainly don't want to give up that chance when I have it. So the way that you do that is just make sure that you are leading the entire way through cross, so that you are the one talking to the jury and just getting a witness to confirm.
It is an awesome moment of getting to totally control the conversation. I mean, I may or may have not done that with my husband a few times, but I didn't have the explicit permission that I had to do that exact thing when I was in the courtroom cross-examining. So it's a great thing. I agree. Why give up that power?
About 6 months ago, I had the tremendous privilege of interviewing Jim Brosnahan for the podcast. And I called him a legendary legend because that is, in the trial world, exactly what he is. And we talked about a lot of things besides his incredible war stories. And one of them was how to use this instrument that we all have to persuade people, and that is to use our voice. So I wonder if it is possible to use your voice to exert control during cross-examination.
Yeah, I think the pitch, the pace, the tone of your voice are all really meaningful in how you're asking questions and how you're getting witnesses to respond. So sometimes if the intonation of your voice is up versus down, that changes the way that the witness responds. If you speak very slowly or in a very quiet voice, the witness responds to you differently. If you want to move things quicker and get witnesses to agree with you more quickly and move through facts, you might pick up the pace that you're asking questions, and make those much shorter and tighter and faster. So the way that we use our voice really matters because it is sort of a cue to the witness, not just in the words we use, but a cue to the witness of what we want from them.
Using your voice on cross for control, people often think of that as, well, you get louder or you get more aggressive. And that's how you would control a witness, because that's just the common assumption. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about. So Adrienne's pointing out all of the different things that you can use and the variations within all of those different things that you have to use. When I teach law students, I always tell them, this is the thing that you already came to law school with, right? We already have our voice and we already have all of these little tricks in our bag. We've used them. We didn't necessarily know what we were using them for or recognize what we're doing, but you need to recognize them now and use those. When we talk about tone during cross-examination, what we mean by that is choosing the right approach. And that is all dictated by the witness sitting in front of you. The example that I always give is in a homicide case, the forensic document examiner that the defense called was actually trained more in graphology, which is the study of interpreting somebody's handwriting to see what that says about their personality. So that probably tells you she was an older woman who was very sweet, very pleasant, and she was working with a set of very limited facts. When she went up to the witness stand and walked very slowly and was very kind and very calm, the approach that I chose for cross-examination was based entirely on that, based entirely on the fact that the jury's going to love her. She is very likable. She is sweet. And here she is in the middle of this ugly homicide case. And what a breath of fresh air. So if I had taken the approach of being very aggressive and very confrontational, probably wouldn't have gotten me anywhere with her. I don't know that I would have been able to get any of the answers that I needed. And the jury would have thought that I was definitely choosing the wrong approach. So you consider that, but that doesn't mean that you have to give up any control. You can use a very calm, even quiet tone or volume and still enunciate and use pacing and be careful about how you phrase things. So you can see I'm doing that with my voice right now, choosing a specific approach, but it's still very clear. And depending on who the witness is, you should be able to exert that control using nothing other than your voice and the way that you handle or deliver your words.
I would imagine that at some point or another, most trial attorneys in their practices have heard or been told, you've got to control the witness better. But then they're left kind of guessing, what does that even mean? How do I do that? And here on the podcast, one of the things that I really strive to do is make sure that listeners come away with really good tips that they can put into practice right away. And so this is one of those chances, I think. I would like to get your tips then on how to control during cross. How do you do that?
So I think one of the best tools for witness control is some self-control. I always say that often, most of the time, when you get an answer you don't like from a witness or that is not responsive, usually that's a you problem. You have not phrased the question well to ask the thing that you want an answer to. So the first thing I always think about when I think of a witness being out of control is whether I did a good job with my questions. Did I lead on cross? Am I introducing one fact and not asking for several facts at a time? Did I leave something up to interpretation? So that's, I think, the first place to look. And the control technique, the takeaway there is stop and regroup and rephrase your question if you asked a poor question. And that's one way to get control back. So that's sort of where I go first, and that usually solves most problems. And then there are sort of a number of places you can go if you have asked a fair question and you still are in a back and forth with a witness that is not helpful. So giving a witness eye contact, repeating your question if you asked a fair question, using a tagline only if you need it. And so by that, I mean, you walked to the corner, correct? Right? Inviting that witness to answer your question. But you have to be very careful about using those only in places where they're appropriate and not overusing them so that they lose their power.
I've definitely been given the feedback of you had no control, so fix it. Well, how do we fix it? And we do want to answer that for you today. The techniques that we're giving you, one thing to remember about them is to put them in order of how you're going to use them. There should be the top thing you grab from your bag and the thing at the very bottom, because we don't want to go nuclear the first time the witness doesn't cooperate on an answer. So Adrienne is right. We start with, how did I phrase the question? Did I phrase the question with facts only? Did I ask a leading question? A little bit of self-reflection is always going to be the first step. The second one, and this one always surprises people, but it actually works 9 times out of 10. If you've determined I asked a factual question, it was a fair question, it deserved a yes or no, but I didn't get one, simply repeat your question. 9 times out of 10, the witness will answer the second time you ask it, recognizing that they didn't answer the question, at least not directly the first time. Then we go in escalating order. Then we go with, I call it the hand. We're going to hold up the hand. And when I hold up my hand, if we're having a conversation, you're going to stop talking. That's this universal signal for stop talking. You can do that on direct. You can do that on cross. We have so the answer to my question was yes. Instead of repeating your question, let's say your question was the light at the intersection was green, and you get a long rambling answer or a long narrative answer, you can say, so the answer to my question, if the light at the intersection was green, is a yes. Correct? Adding the tagline. When we say taglines, we're talking about the correct. Isn't that true? Isn't that right? And just by the way that I said those, you can see why we want you to leave those off until you need them, because they get distracting if they're at the end of every cross question. Save them for emphasis. The answer to my question of the light at the intersection was green is it was green. Correct. And you can add some emphasis there. Trying to think what else we haven't thought of yet, Adrienne. Oh, the repeat reverse. So if you repeat your question and you still don't get the yes or no, you can reverse it. The light at the intersection was green. Long, rambling answer. The light at the intersection was green. Correct? Still a long narrative answer. So you're saying the light was red? Well, no, the light was green. Works every time. Okay. Probably better if you have a short enough cross-examination question, but you can just flip it and then get what you need from the witness. Eye contact, that's just a personal favorite for me. Also, very, very effective locking eyes with the witness, because it's a lot more difficult to lie to somebody if you're having a conversation with them if eye contact is made and locked. So don't forget that one.
Pin them down with your eyes.
Yeah. And along those lines, I think one of the ones that I like to use a lot and that is really effective, particularly if I have a witness who's really being difficult, we underestimate how well people respond to their own name. And so using their name in your question by just saying, Miss Johnson, and people will, for whatever reason, be really responsive if you use their name and sort of pull them back into the conversation. So that's another one that I will use if somebody is particularly difficult.
It's the mom effect, right? Our moms use names or full names, but the names definitely work.
So between the two of you, I'm sure you have spent literally thousands of hours in court and have heard a lot and seen a lot. So I wonder what you have seen other people do in court that worked out really well for them, that was really successful. I would love to hear some stories about that.
So some examples that I can give you from now watching on the bench, right? Because I'm talking about a lot of my experience from when I was a practicing lawyer. Now I'm on the bench and I see some great lawyers do some things that are very personal and unique to them, but they work really well for those specific lawyers. And the first one that I noticed was when I took the bench, I had a family law docket and I had a domestic attorney who was very skilled at cross-examination. And if she was not getting a clear answer to her fairly worded question, factual question that deserved a yes or no, and she had repeated it at least once, I noticed that she would occasionally say, so I'm really not trying to trip you up with this question. I'm just trying to figure out X. Just making it clear that I'm just trying to get an answer to this. Trying to disarm them is what she was doing. And I was telling Adrienne about this yesterday. And what's interesting is I don't know if she was trying to trip him up or not. I'm not sure. But did she get her answer when she did that? Every single time. She disarmed the witness and they answered the question clearly. So that was a personal example that I noticed right away. I never did that in practice. I don't know if it would have worked for me, but it worked for this attorney. Other examples that I've seen are specific turns of phrase that some lawyers use that really just fit their personality. Just a couple of days ago, cross-examination by a criminal defense attorney with an officer on the stand. And when the officer was giving him a long narrative about things that happened and he was just wanting to focus on one specific thing, the attorney would say, well, we're going to parse through that part later. Right now, I want to focus on this. And just the way he said it was so friendly. I'm not trying to shut the witness down, not trying to hide anything. We'll get to that later, but he said, we're going to parse through that later. And it was really effective.
Yeah, I think the through line with this is really being authentic and showing up in a space as who you are actually goes much further with witness prep and witness control than you think. And I think people sometimes show up to court feeling like they need to speak in a certain way or behave in a certain way, when actually a lot of the conversation that happens with a witness comes from just showing up authentically. So if it's a turn of phrase you use in your regular life when you are talking to a partner or a friend, sometimes that just feels natural talking to a witness too.
Well, that's something that we talk about so much at NEDA, is that you've got to be yourself as a trial attorney. And it is kind of you're a work in progress as you try to find your trial style. But it's so important for you to make being you actually work for you. So what are some ways that your own personal style comes into play when it comes to witness control, and why certain techniques work for other people, but they will not work for you?
Well, it's all about the sincerity of it. Trial is absolutely theater, but what that means is a more passionate version of you than you maybe are in your day-to-day tasks. Some people are really passionate all the time. So it's theater, but it still has to be sincere. Like Adrienne says, if I wouldn't use that phrase talking to friends or just out in my daily life, it's probably not going to sound very authentic or genuine if I use it in the courtroom. It's also a matter of how you think the prior fact perceives you. You know, who are you in the courtroom? Everybody has a different style. Important to have that and to stick with it. For me, it was I'm the consummate professional, which means that humor, if I tried to do it, probably wasn't going to land. That just wasn't my trial persona. While on the other side of the line, there were attorneys who did it really, really well. I've seen attorneys be very self deprecating and it works for them. It would not have worked for me. So, things that you know about yourself and what you believe the jury is perceiving of you, you need to stick with that and not change and try to be somebody else's style. The jury will see through that right away.
You know, a personal example for me is that I worked and tried cases in my hometown. So I was familiar with the streets and the places where things happened and the places where people worked. So I got permission, had permission to speak a little more colloquially in those spaces because I was so familiar. And that was a thing that helped me have conversations with witnesses and control conversations with witnesses that might not have worked for another attorney. But it was a way that I could show up in the courtroom that was effective and that was impactful and that was really sort of true to me and my style of trying cases.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you're suggesting that your geographic location and the venue can actually come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I think every place has a style and every courtroom has a feel. And so in some places, there are things that I could get away with that I could not get away with in others. And in some places, there are things I wouldn't dare try because I just am not as familiar. And so I think each venue, each courtroom really just has a different personality, and understanding what that personality is, who's on the bench, what your jurors might be like. That's all really important to how we decide to go about these cases.
I agree. Well, of course, I agree. I'm the judge, so my courtroom is different than other judges' courtrooms. You have to know your judge. That would be something to think about. But as far as venue and different geography, there's just differences in practice style. When I teach all over the country, I notice that things are very different regionally. So on the West Coast, everybody's very polite, very sensitive to saying certain things and careful about their language. It's not like that in every jurisdiction. And if you go further into, well, I'll use Florida as an example. That was probably the most surprising to me because the lawyers are more bold in court. That's the style of practice. So you need to have that kind of confidence and swagger to be in those Florida courtrooms. If I did that here in the Midwest, if I had done that as a practicing attorney, I think that it would have scored against me. I think I would have been expected to follow a different level of decorum and different level of approach, maybe based on my gender, maybe based on the geography. Those are all things that do come into play for your personal style, and that factors into how you choose to control the witness.
I think that's such an interesting observation. And when you were speaking about Florida, it made me remember about how sometimes in a lawsuit or in a case, you want to engage local counsel to help you out because they know those customs
Yes,
that you don't know.
so true.
So, Adrienne, I wonder if then the type of hearing, or what I'm hearing from you is venue matters, location matters, geography matters, but does the type of hearing or proceeding that you are participating in also play into witness control?
Oh, it absolutely matters. Um, what I will ask in front of a jury is different than what I will ask when there's just a judge on the bench. What I will ask in a trial is different than what I might ask in a motion hearing. And so, I think one of the things to think about is when you are in front of a jury, you really are performing a bit. The jury has to like you. And so you have to be a little bit more careful with the kinds of questions you ask, the way you choose to control a witness, because you're endearing the jury to you in addition to your client and your case. So my sort of rule is to be one level kinder than the witness is being to me, right? Because the jury has to like me more. When it's just a motions hearing, for example, or if I am in front of a judge that I practice in front of a lot and am comfortable with, that judge, because I might have a relationship or have built a rapport, might let me go a little bit further in terms of getting the answers to questions that I want and pushing a witness a little bit more. So it absolutely matters who you're in front of and what kind of hearing you're in.
Well, what we haven't talked about yet is for those in civil practice when they're doing depositions and trying to control a witness. And that is something that may be vastly different than how you approach it at trial, and maybe vastly different within the different parts of the deposition. A discovery deposition is very open-ended. You're trying to get more information from the witness, where you move into the other portion of gaining admissions or testing out a theory, and you're actually asking leading questions, you're pushing harder. Your approach, your tone may change. What's really interesting is that now we have a lot of video depositions thanks to Zoom. Everybody likes to do depositions on Zoom. So you probably have to watch that a little more carefully than you would before, because the jury may see exactly what you were doing and how you sounded when you asked the question, as opposed to just the cold record that has only your words. So that's something to think about. I wanted to go back to the one level kinder phrase. I love how you describe that. That is something that is so important with witness control, because again, what we're talking about here is your approach. How are you choosing to approach the witness? And that decision has to be based on what you think the jury is going to give you permission to do. They were not going to give me permission to be very aggressive cross-examining Avis Odenbaugh. That was her name, by the way, Avis. So they weren't going to like it if I approached that in a way that Avis came off a lot kinder. than I did, I needed to make sure that they had the right picture of me, and essentially I needed to have permission to be more aggressive in that cross-examination. For example, when the defendant took the stand, that was a different back and forth. So recognizing how the witness is perceived in comparison to you, that is important for choice on how to control and the control technique that you're going to use.
I think that what we've been leading toward with all of these questions is that to be a great trial attorney, you've got to be able to embrace flexibility. You control what you can, but there's still so much that you can't necessarily predict. And all you can do is be really nimble and to pivot on those things that you cannot control. And so I'd like to talk about some of those things that are a little bit harder to control. And I think that one of the things that is really hard for new attorneys in particular to give up control on is the script. We always say break up with your notes. That's a Nita thing. Break up with your notes. So I would like to get your thoughts on how to use an outline with just bullet points rather than using really scripted questions.
One of the things that I think about with every single witness is really narrowing down what my goal is. What must I get from my conversation with this particular witness? And often we get sidetracked because we want to ask all of the questions about all of the things, and we get jumbled, and that's when we get really married to our notes because we want to make sure that we check every box. But I like to think about it in terms of what are my broad goals? What is my goal with this witness? And that guides what I do. So my goals might just be a bulleted list. I need this witness to establish that the light was green and that we were on Market Street. That's it. And so my questions will be tailored to reaching that goal. It also helps when you're listening to a witness give you answers if you aren't married to a script, because you can pick up on some real gems that a witness might give you. But if you're married to a script, what happens physically in your body is that you're looking down at your notes and checking off things, and you are not listening to what just came from the stand. So if you just have goals rather than a script, you really can interact with the witness in a way that is much more persuasive.
We are completely in sync on this. I do it exactly the same way. I simply call it a different thing. So my goals were my main points in the case became my head notes. So I always had an outline with my actual head notes written out with bullets underneath of what I want to get from the witness in responses when I use that head note, which is very easy to be flexible and adapt because those different points or the goals, as Adrienne calls them, can be reorganized in any way that you need them to. Whereas a script has to go in order. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense because the story's not fitting together. The questions just won't work. We're not hearing the exact words. So if your goals or your major points in the case are your head notes, your transitional statements, especially on cross-examination to guide the jury about what your point is going to be, then you can be very flexible in controlling the witness when they go off topic. I also wanted to chime in on the listening part because this is perhaps one of the most difficult skills when you have a witness on the stand is to remember to listen because we're focused on our questions and our notes. One of the control techniques that you can use if you're listening really well on cross-examination is simply adopting the witness's own words to phrase your next question or to reaffirm a point. What I mean by that is if I have a witness who I ask the question of, it was really busy in the reception area that day. And the witness says, I wouldn't say it was really busy, but it was very crowded. That's right. It was very crowded that day. Your point's made. You've got what you need. The witness decided to wiggle on you a little bit and wanted to use their own words. Those words are probably even better. So if you're listening, you can take that nugget, the gem, as Adrienne called it, and turn it into a question, reaffirm it. And now you're right back in control because the witness gave you what you needed.
Judge Hanley, you mentioned cross. Are there big differences between this technique of giving up your notes between cross and direct examination?
For me, it was never a difference. I use the same outline technique for direct and cross. I would say that for new attorneys, I've had a lot of law students, for example, say, I'm just not comfortable without fully written out questions because I'm still learning how to phrase them open ended and I'm still learning how to keep them short and to make sure that I get all of the questions asked. And I think that there's a time and a place early in your career to write out your questions and train yourself how to phrase questions, but still include your head notes. Why? Because that will bring you back to where you need to be when the witness goes off script. When the witness starts talking about something else, you'll already have that transition statement, the head note, to get you back to the topic where you left off. So that would be the variation. Adrienne, what do you think? Did you ever write out questions?
Yeah, I use the same technique for direct and cross. And I think something Judge Hanley said earlier is really important here. You've got to know your case really, really well by this point, and being really prepared and knowing your case well helps you be off book a little bit, right? If you know what's coming and what the facts are in your case, and you're really confident about that, all of us with cases that we've tried could probably talk about what happened in our sleep. And just having that comfort and knowing that you know this case like the back of your hand lets you walk away from your notes a little bit.
Do you remember how long it took you when you were a new attorney to break up with your notes, to walk away from them?
Oh, probably a while. My practice is criminal defense largely. And so there was a special kind of nervousness that comes with having a client whose liberty was at stake. And so I think it probably took me longer than I should have to walk away from my notes. But I was actually far more effective for those clients when I did, because the thoughtfulness and passion that I had for my clients and their cases really sort of shone through in a way that didn't when I was reading from a script.
At the end of my trial lawyer career before I took the bench, I can confidently say that my notes and I were still in a very strong, supportive relationship. But I could walk away from those notes. I think that's the difference. Having them there, that's a crutch, and that's okay. But you don't want to be reading from them or buried in them or tied to them in a way that you can't be flexible. But it's absolutely fine to walk back to the podium and take a look at that list and make sure you're good to go and no further questions, Your Honor. So having the notes versus being buried in the notes and tied to them, different things.
I think that interplay that we've been talking about between trying to loosen one's grip on notes while also listening, actively listening and focusing on what somebody else is saying so that you can pick up little gems and nuggets that you would have missed otherwise, and to avoid, asking the same questions over and over. It's just kind of interesting. It's definitely a skill that takes a lot of work to cultivate.
And tuning that listening ear so that you hear a strong ending and you know it and you sit down. Because that's part of the control obsession that we have is, well, I haven't got through all my questions yet, and I've still got a couple of categories here. But man, the witness just said something great for our case. And if that's the last thing that the jury hears and they remember that, we are well on our way to a win. So part of the control of the witness examination is not what you think it is. Well, I got through all my questions, they answered. That was great. That's just how it should go. We don't have to ask all those other questions if we get such a good answer that it's the right spot to end. So embrace that, but you have to tune the listening ear to be ready to hear it.
So at trial, there will always be problems. Is it ever possible to expect particular types of problems so that in the moment, the locus of control still remains in your hands?
Yeah, I think there are certain problems that will come up in any trial. One of the things that you can be prepared for is what happened a lot in my witness prep. What did we stumble on a lot in witness prep, and sort of gear yourself up for that. One of the things that I always think about is once I have gone through what I want to cover in an examination, I then need to go through what do I think might get objected to and prep and plan for that, because there's nothing that derails an argument more than an objection you weren't anticipating and not knowing how to respond. So really sort of thinking about what might come from the other side also is a way to prep for the inevitable objection that's coming.
And often, a problem that we have often is witnesses who don't remember a specific detail, maybe a lot of details. And you should expect that any witness, even an expert, even someone who has testified multiple times, will forget those details. So going back to our discussion on witness prep, expecting that problem means you're going to give the witness a cue during prep for how to remedy that. This is when you tell them, I don't remember or I don't recall, will give me the ability to refresh your memory. I will be able to help you remember, but I have to hear those words. The judge needs to hear those words before they're going to let me help you. So this does two things. First, it puts your witness at ease. Okay, good. If I don't remember everything, my attorney can help me out. And second, it tells them exactly what they need to say so that you can do that technique of refreshing recollection. Once they say, I don't remember or I don't recall, then you can go into that specific procedure. But that was a part of every single witness that I ever prepped. It was one of the major areas that I covered and planned for, because you just don't know when it's going to happen. And if it does, it's probably on something really crucial for your case. So be ready for it. Expect it.
Well, I think it's time for some war stories. I think that they're not just fun to listen to, but we can also learn secondhand through them. And so, if it would be okay, I would like to hear about some of your own personal, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times stories, your personal direct or cross gone wrong. And then we can also balance it out with, times when you got it just exactly right. Adrienne, can you think of a time that you really should have done it differently?
Oh yeah. This is really a testament to leading on cross, because I did not do that and got a result that I did not want. As a very young lawyer, there was a witness on the stand who was talking about injuries that she had received. And the police report indicated a scratch or a bruise. And instead of leading and saying, you told the police officer you had a scratch, I said, those were the only injuries you had, weren't they? And then she proceeded to list about 16 other injuries that I was not prepared for and that made my client look really, really, really bad. So because I did not lead, that cross went off the rails really quickly. I lost control really quickly, and had to find a way to dig myself out of it.
And how did you do that? How'd you dig out?
Taking a pause and regrouping myself and understanding what I had done wrong was the first step. And then I went back and really sort of led through, what was reported and what was not reported, right? So I really sort of focused on at the time of the incident, this is what was reported. This is what you said. These are the pictures that were taken. Um, and walking back through that with questions that led my witness to the right place.
So that was your teachable moment. What about you, Judge Hanley?
Well, I'm not going to tell you exactly when this happened. We'll just say the early years. All right. Early years. But I had some experience when this happened. And it was a criminal case. It was in front of the jury. I had a witness on the stand who was very combative in cross-examination. And clearly, I was too combative in return because one of her responses was, "Do you want to take this outside?" And I can assure you that had we taken it outside, I would have lost that cross examination. So while I wanted to say, no, I do not want to take this outside, I absolutely recognized in the moment that it had ramped up too high, which I have to attribute to me. This was cross-examination of the other side's witness, but my reaction and my approach to the witness was clearly too aggressive because I had baited her. Now, some might think, well, that probably looks good to the jury if she was reacting that way. Not necessarily. I would not assume that. So what I did to climb out of that hole was recognize that what she was doing was asking me a question. And this is a practice tip. If you're on cross-examination and the witness responds to your question with a question, do not take the bait. Do not answer it. Do not engage in a conversation because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to put you in their position. We're just two people having a conversation, and that's not what's going on. You're the cross-examiner, and for you to maintain control and signal to the jury that you are in control, you cannot answer their question. So thankfully, I didn't compound the problem by making a mistake in answering the question. I took a breath. I went back to counsel table, stacked my notes while I'm thinking in my mind, okay, settle down, calm down, relax. And then when I got back up to the podium, I said, I'm going to repeat my last question. And I asked the question, and we went right through the cross-examination. She was still combative at times, but I changed my approach at least one level, if not 10 levels kinder than she was being, to signal to the jury that I'm still in control of this cross-examination. But it shook me. One of the few times I've been rendered completely speechless, at least for a few seconds in the courtroom.
Well, we've heard where things can go wrong. Have there been times when you got it just exactly right? Judge Hanley, go ahead.
My most clear memory of a solid cross-examination was at a motion hearing. An expert was on the stand for the defense who had conducted a jury study. And I had prepared for that cross-examination, lengthy preparation, gone through the data, gone through the study, to the point where I had the percentages, the questions asked, the survey numbers memorized because there were flaws in the data and the way that questions were phrased that would help me defeat the point that he was trying to make and keep the case in the county where the case had been filed. So it was successful because of my level of preparation and because I really believe to this day that I knew his data better than he did. Now, that's likely because he does lots of these jury studies, and so it was easier for me to just remember one set of data, but I knew that data forwards and backwards, so I was able to cross-examine with the facts and show where he was wrong. This was not based on conclusory statements. It wasn't any big revelation cross. It was just solid factual questions showing the flaws. And I think I got there because of my preparation.
That's great. What about you, Adrienne?
I think one of my most successful moments is really related to something we talked about in the very beginning of this discussion. and it's giving your witness space to ventilate and really building rapport. I had a case that really ultimately centered around family relationships. And when I was preparing my witness, what I learned was that he was incredibly passionate about his family. He knew everything about everyone. He knew everything, all of the smallest details down to, when the youngest family member would graduate and what school they were going to. And that was a place where I knew that that witness could really shine and connect to the jury. And so I spent time letting him do that in my direct examination on the stand because I knew that that was a place that he was going to be really, really stellar and show what his relationship was like with family. And that only came because I was really thoughtful about witness prep, and I was really thoughtful about spending time in the beginning, getting prepared and understanding who my witness was and what made him tick. So the direct examination was great because he got to show that and because the jury got to connect with him in a way that I might have missed if I hadn't spent a lot of time prepping.
What I hear from both of those stories is preparation is key.
Preparation is key, which is true for all parts of the trial, but I think that we sometimes do less of it for witness examinations because we think we're just asking questions. I know the content, I'll just play off what the witness says, and I'll kind of glide through it in the moment. And you still have to prepare, and we don't want you scripted, but we need to know the facts. We need to have anticipated where the witness might go and have thought about it beforehand. So the preparation is just as important for this part of the trial as any other.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. And as I mentioned before, I always try to make sure that these episodes are worth our listeners' time invested in them, that they come away with lots of tips that they tuck in their back pockets. And I think you both have accomplished that. And I thank you so much for spending time with us today to do exactly that.
Thank you for having us.
So, my last questions are always the fun ones. And the first one I will address to you, Adrienne, and that is, what are you obsessed with on TV right now?
Oh, goodness. There has been a resurgence of 90s nostalgia in TV lately. So I have just finished the reboot of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. So that has been what I've been digging into lately.
Which did you like? The old or the new?
I'm partial to the old one, but they did a good job with it.
How about you, Judge Hanley? What are you watching?
Well, now I'm going to have to check that out because I loved the old version. So here's what I'm obsessed with right now. And I've already seen the whole series once, but I want to watch it again because I thought it was so good. Have you guys watched The Diplomat with Carrie Russell? There's only one
I have.
There's only one season out, and I love her character. Strong female character. What I like about it, she gets stuff done. So she's an ambassador with a diplomatic career, and they assign her to the UK as a diplomat, but they're also grooming her to be the vice president. And it's in a way where they could actually put somebody in office who gets stuff done and can get away with saying what they think, which we know is not typical in politics. So that's my teaser for The Diplomat. I love it. It's a very action-packed show, but of course I love the strong female lead.
How would you spend $1 million, Judge Hanley? And don't bore us to death by saying that you would pay bills. What would you do with $1 million?
Oh, I will not. I will not bore you. So I have a milestone birthday coming up, and I was thinking if somebody gave me $1 million, I would take one luxury trip a month for all 12 months of the year and to somewhere very swanky and posh and completely unnecessary if somebody handed me $1 million.
Well, that sounds amazing. What are some of the venues or places you'd go to?
I think the first one I would do during January is somewhere warm, like Bermuda or one of the islands, just very private. I haven't been to Puerto Rico yet. I know there's a great resort that I've been eyeing. So I would start there.
All right. Well, that sounds great. How about you, Adrienne? What would you do with $1 million?
So I think all lawyers have a job that they swear they would take if they were not lawyers. Mine would be to be a florist. So I would open a little flower shop, I think. I designed the flowers for my own wedding, so I just opened a cute little flower shop.
Wow, that sounds fantastic.
That is lovely. And unexpected, because I know you're very into sports. So I would have thought maybe you would have done something along those lines. So that's great.
Yeah, I'm an ex-athlete, but sometimes you just need a little beauty around you to calm you down.
As I always say to Marcy, I love fancy, and we can't let fancy die.
Never. Thanks again to Judge Amy Hanley and Adrienne Johnson for spreading the wealth of their knowledge in this meeting of the minds. As I mentioned in the opening, they're teaching together at the NIDA Women in Trial program in Chicago this fall, and it is an exciting chance to learn from the best of the best. If that interests you, look for the link in the show notes, but don't wait too long. This program always sells out every year. As always, thank you for listening. It really means the world to us that you've invested not just your time with NIDA by listening to the podcast, but that you've also invested in yourself to grow as a legal advocate and as an important part of our judicial system. Your competence and your ethics matter, and they help make our system of justice a little more of an even playing field for all those who find themselves on it. I'll be back next month with a fantastic episode on storytelling for judges, featuring 2 judges in conversation. They are buddies on the bench, so it's really fun to listen to them bat ideas around. Until then, I wish you all the best in your depositions, motions, and trials. Have a great month. May the Record Reflect is a NIDA Studio 71 production. NIDA. We are advocacy enhanced, mentorship reimagined. Welcome to the community.